Hello everyone, and welcome to the extensive history of Deployable Cover Launching, also known as the DC launch for short. When Halo 3 was released, it introduced equipment items that can be collected and carried by a player. These items can be activated at any time with a simple button press. One of the equipment added to the game was the Deployable Cover, a new spin on the stationary shield generator that existed previously in Halo CE and Halo 2, except it was now mobile. This video will cover the discovery of the DC launch, the experimentation and routing of DC launching into the speedrun, but most importantly, it demonstrates how the run has developed and the ideas the runners had in pushing the game to its limits. A forum post on the 26th of November 2007, these Halo and Deployable Cover Launches was posted to Hindback Halo. This post details a rough outline on how to do various launches, including forwards and backwards, which has slowly become commonplace throughout the Halo 3 speedrun. The very first video on DC launching was released by Exo Studios on December 1st, 2007. This gave examples on the DC launch with tutorial. Unfortunately, the inconsistency and difficulty of the trick on the original 360 release meant that DC launching would take many years before it slowly began to be implemented in the speedrun. Initially, a segmented only strategy, Sliding Ghost was the pioneer who first began to test the speedrun viability. Unfortunately, all of Sliding Ghost's content and videos are now removed from the internet. We've lost a lot of the earliest footage of DC launching. The first few videos we have on DC launching come from early H3DS or Halo 3 done segmented routing videos, and experimentation by Slinky and Mr. Monopoly. To explain how a DC launch is performed, it is done by throwing down a DC mid-jump, which allows the DC's collision model to appear around Master Chief's collision model. We then allow the game to start building up separation force vector, and then walk out of the DC's collision model before the force vector overflows. This results in the force vector still being applied, but since we're in free space, there is nothing stopping our movement, and we simply jet away from the DC. Fast forwarding to the 13th of May 2013, we see a video emerge in a segmented format of two DC launches performed by Slinky, which were initially discovered by Sliding Ghost. Slinky goes on to release a Floodgate Segmented a few days later. The run itself does not feature a DC launch, but instead the discussion in the comments raised the idea of what a DC launch could look like, which is then followed up by Mr. Monopoly shortly after. The rest of the clips are more experimental ideas of what DC launching in the run could look like. A few of these are later further developed by other runners and revisited and refined.
Hail humans and take heed. This is the carrier, Shadow of Intent. Clear while we deal with the flood.
As you can see, the first initial series of launches did not produce much power, and given the difficulty, were deemed not worth attempting to implement in the speedrun outside of a segmented scenario. The DC launch to the Scarab will be later revisited by Sleepless Blue, and would develop into one of the most important discoveries in Halo 3.
I can barely keep hold of her, Chief. There's no way I can pick you up. Head back to the lift. Find a way down. I can barely keep hold of her, Chief. There's no way I can pick you up.
Sometime between these two videos, a new method of DC launching was discovered, which as you can see, gave a lot more power. The Covenant Citadel DC launch does look incredible, but unfortunately a lot of what is possible in the game is limited to a series of trigger volumes, which you can see in the top right here. These triggers must be hit for the level to complete, otherwise you softlock. Mr. Monopoly is the first person to experiment and try to figure out the Shadow of Intent DC launch, whilst trying to do Floodgate for H3DS. This DC launch would go on to be the very first DC launch on an IL or individual level, formed by History 100 over a year later. The quick clip of Slinky DC launching on the Ark would be later revisited by Danza in search of a consistent strategy for Spark Door deload. This is the very first DC launch ever hit in an IL in Halo 3. With the release of the Master Chief Collection on the 11th of November 2014, we saw a new power in DC launching. Nagato is one of the first to experience the new DC launch. His commentary pretty much sums up everything you need to know about the current state of DC launching at that time. As you can hear from his reaction, the power and ease of the launch is not what was previously known or expected.
Why doesn't anyone try and do a DC launch? Whoa! Okay!
Now,
That was different.
at last I see. The
Okay.
secret is revealed.
So, what happened there?
Alien Flow is the first to really sit down and toy with the new DC launching power. He revisits the Shadow of Intent DC launch, and when compared to the 360 version, you can really see the difference in speed. Nagato returns to join in the fun. Uploading a video titled DC Launching is Easy, he's able to hit the trick back to back multiple times, proving its newfound consistency. Experimenting with other ideas and trying in new locations, Nagato pushes what's currently known and possible for DC launching. The first clip, he's able to launch with such power he breaks through an invisible barrier. The next clip is the first look into the possibility of using a DC launch to clip through walls.
Take them off, Lieutenant. If he does, Earth, every being in the galaxy.
Nagato follows up with his experimentation by trying to clip through the invisible wall at the start of the Covenant, preventing you from reaching the third tower. He's able to land on the cliff and makes his way to the second tower. This idea would later be revisited by Sleepless Blue when he attempts to DC launch to grab the Banshee. Alien Flow revisits the idea of the attempted DC clip. Proving it impossible to skip the jetpack fight on Crow's Nest, the idea is dropped for the time being. Adding Tonight comes up with the idea of the DC Chasm launch on Floodgate, which is first hit by Alien Flow in a world record run. This is the second DC launch to feature in an IL. On April 2nd, 2015, Alien Flow and Lord Zed both had the same idea, attempting to skip the elevator ride on Crow's Nest. This was actually something I missed in my previous history video, where I claimed Sleepless Blue was the first to attempt this. On the same day as his attempted elevator skip, Alienflow uploads a video demonstrating the new power of the DC launch in a fantastic video on Savo.
Say again, Recon? You're breaking up.
And here we have Danza. Danza's first contribution of using a DC launch to overlap Gravemind moments essentially makes one cancel out and not play at all.
And yet, perhaps a part of her remains.
The next series of clips are where Danza really shines. He first uploads 4 videos in one day. The first 2 are sideways launches, using a very interesting setup to launch through the Warehouse of Storm, now known as Double DC Ending. These also being the first usage of the sideways DC launch. The sideways DC launch carried similar speed, but less vertical height, making them much more controllable for interior sections of gameplay. Danza had some fantastic contribution, helping find various ideas for H3DS. He experimented with arc routing and found some nice DC launches. The first one didn't end up having much use, but the second is now featured in the Segmented project and more recently the IL. He would further go on to develop the second launch into a launch to the second Ghost. If you watch closely, you'll notice Danza accidentally hits a small backwards launch here. This goes unnoticed in the community, and I only picked up on it after reviewing the footage myself. The very first DC clip. Once again, Danza's fantastic work blew the game open. It now being possible to clip through any wall or door alive, the game was blown open in terms of possibility. Runners would go on to hit the game hard, trying to find out what would work while still hitting essential triggers. I wanted to show this clip because I love the idea of Danza using the truck to cushion the impact on the other side of the door. Unfortunately, this clip had no real use because the next door will still be closed. Drone Door DC Clip is the first speedrun application found by clipping being possible.
Okay, we got it. We actually have it. I like it.
Sleepless Blue uploads a video containing a variety of DC launch ideas. Most importantly is the use of substituting the Great Launch in the Drone Tunnel and the Cortana Moment launch after the Hell Room on Cortana. I also include a nice launch of Floodgate, which is further developed by Alienflow, and overall a nice idea.
And sing victory.
Storm Scarab Skip. Legato finds the biggest time save Halo 3 seen in years. He skips the Scarab fight entirely, and the video goes on to prove the level can be completed under the circumstances. In the midst of all these speedrun discoveries, people were also just having fun with DC clips. Nagato revisits a well-known trick called Rec Room, which previously required a setup that took 3 to 4 hours. Many of us, myself included, were just having fun clipping into rooms no one had ever seen before.
Go! I'll cover you.
Danza DC launches up the Covenant elevator shaft in attempts to save time skipping the ride, also discovering it would disable the movement of the enemies at the top. He goes on to prove it's just possible to descend with the lucky flare drop. Nagato discovers another use for the DC clip. Upon rescuing Cortana and blowing up the 3 reactors, you are able to leave the room before the door explodes. Not a huge time save, but there may be potential with a later clip that Bohr discovers. Alien Flo decides to try his luck ending Crow's Nest upon first entry into the hangar. He DC clips into where the end level trigger exists, in hopes to end the level in just a few minutes. Upon discovering there is no elevator loaded, he tries to hit the button, he misses, but he hits the load just as he dies, raising suspicion. He returns the next day more prepared. With a co-op partner, he's able to potentially hit the load and respawn his partner back, ride the elevator down, and end the level. This time he hits the button, and the load, the elevator spawns in, but unfortunately that is the end of the idea. The elevator doesn't work, and the level can't end. Alien Flo revisits the Sleepless Blue launch from earlier. This time, it changes to a sideways, he's able to launch himself directly to the button. Danza with another fantastic idea. He's able to clip all the way down to the camera room. Unfortunately, the death barrier is still there, but he has not tried this before the button press. Citadel clip discovery with the outrageous setup included. Initially not viable without invincibility, Danza demonstrates his creative methods of carrying 2 equipment over to the clip spot. The initial discovery carried the full momentum through to the next room, meaning for Danza to survive the impact, he would need to use invincibility. This trick was initially not used in speedruns because it wasn't able to save time. Danza revisits the Slinky launch at the start of the video and attempts to help find a consistent spark door deload. This DC launch would mean additional Marines will arrive in the next area, which you can see for yourself by the left of the Prowler.
But it's surrounded by a brute heavy armor.
Don't worry, I've got a plan.
This is the first conceptual idea of the double DC Salvo ending, an idea that to this day has yet to see its full potential. It is currently believed possible to be faster than a typical vehicle ending, but as seen in the next clip, all the required necessary triggers make it difficult to actually hit.
Chief, the gate to Boy is dead ahead. Smash the brute blockade. Open her up.
This would have been the best DC clip of all time. The level plays no further Cortana moments, spawns on my enemies, the level is playable up until breaking Cortana stasis, but soft locks there. Alien Flow presents the idea of sideways DC launching across the chasm into another DC to then combine with his sideways launch from earlier. Sleepless Blue presents the Spark Door clip, which he had been previously attempting with the vehicle bump. He's able to hit the trick, but finds the next door still closed. The trick wouldn't be useful at that current moment in time.
Chief, take one of the tanks. Lead the way.
In further efforts to find a consistent setup for Spark Door deload, Sleepless Blue explores an area we are now familiar with as the tankless out of bounds on Legendary. Unfortunately, neither this nor the previous Danza clip worked. Sleepless Blue returns to the Scarab DC launch on the Ark. Mostly for style points, he's able to land on the Scarab and kill it. While having no real application to the speedrun, he does accidentally discover backwards DC launching. With the Citadel clip currently not saving any time, Danza turns the DC usage elsewhere during the time of H3DS routing, attempting this incredible DC launch to the Banshee.
Everything they've got.
With a near miss, he returns a few days later with a clear mind. This time, he hits it.
Citadel in sight. Troops are mobilizing everything they've got.
And here we have Hark. Hark revisits Sleepless Blue's first Spark Door DC clip and goes on to test if it's possible to clip through the second door, which it is. This strategy is used in H3DS. Danza is able to clip into the first interior room, which is after blowing up the Scarab in the Ark, skipping enemy spawns and saving a few seconds. A good idea for Legendary. He's able to hit the chapter trigger from the corner inside the room, proceed through the next rooms with no enemies, hit the button down below, which proves the level does not softlock. On the same day, Slippers Blue is working elsewhere on the Ark. He's the first to discover the vertical DC launch. Here we have the first attempt at launching to the Banshees and Covenant, which was an idea for H3DS. This is still yet to be hit without active game modifiers. Ark's famous DC clip at the end of Floodgate, which skips the requirement to go through the ship at the end.
Time's curse, join your race with mine, and sing victory.
Here we have the vertical DC launch up the elevator shaft on Crows, which is a much more controlled DC launch than previously worked on.
They've got jump packs. They're going after the thrusters. Shake them off, Lieutenant.
Some interesting ideas by Dancer here. So, whilst working on H3DS, he worked on a few clips out of Hellroom. The first would have pushed him to the corridor above, which leads to Reactor Room. And the second looks like it would have launched him into the Reactor Room itself. Unfortunately, these clips didn't work at the time, but they may be worth revisiting. Paradoxic goes back to the backwards DC launch idea. He finds the power is unmatched by any DC launch at the time. Similar to Sideways, it's pure power with almost no vertical height, which is a new option for clipping, since Sideways launches do not contain the speed required to clip. Alien Flow immediately jumps on the backwards DC launch idea, but he decides to experiment with clipping. He's able to clip with alarmingly high consistency, proving a new method entirely. Here we have a couple bonus clips from Hark. I wasn't able to pull their exact date because they're just Twitch clips, but they are early examples of backwards DC clipping. The second skips the Shadow of Intent cutscene entirely. This is the only remaining Sliding Ghost clip on the internet. I am happy I have it. It demonstrates Sliding Ghost testing forwards-facing backwards DC launches. This clip will speak for itself. Just some further examples of demonstrating backwards DC launching.
Gator boy is dead ahead. Chief, the Gator boy. Chief, the Gator boy. Chief, the Gator boy. Chief, the Gator boy.
Danza attempts the backwards DC clip into the Citadel, thus making it viable for the speedrun, since we are now able to skip the requirement for the invincibility. Arc also alters Danza's forwards DC clip with a slight angle change, making that now possible to survive. Another Hark bonus clip. Again, no date because it's a Twitch clip, but it's a variation of the Citadel clip, except from the front door. This is the rooftop DC launch, which also featured in Sorix's Easy Storm segmented run he did recently. Here we have the first two silo clips by Hark. The first launches into the silo itself, the second is much closer to the door. With a slight angle, he's able to launch directly into the Cortana moment and be closer to where he wants to be, proving to be a much better launch than the first. Cortana moments provide the player with invincibility, making surviving the launch much easier. Danza revisits the Reactor Room DC clip on Cortana with the new backwards DC clip. Orr is adamant to make the Reactor Room DC clip save time, so he finds a spot at the bottom of the Reactor Room, as demonstrated by this first clip of his. The idea he presents in these two videos is to be able to launch directly into the tunnel below Danza's previous clip. The first video involves showing the exact location of the clip idea. The second video demonstrates the clip itself, but he is unable to successfully clip alive.
You heard it, Chief. We need to get to Halo.
Danza's redirect launch from Floodgate. He is able to slow some of his speed by colliding with the container, making this launch perfect to land by the ship.
On that ship. Find her. Get her up.
Arc returns to the silo clip once more, finding a much earlier location the level he was able to clip from. He's still got the same result as previous silo clips, saving roughly 5 to 10 seconds. Paradoxic attempts to try Bohr's previous clip, getting a better attempt but still cannot clip alive. When Halo 3 initially released on PC, it changed the Master Chief leg model, making a lot of current known DC launches to function differently. The current runners at the time had to revisit known launches to work on new setups. This meant runners heavily leaned towards sideways, where a forwards was previously present. Kronos finds a nice sideways at the end of the Covenant. Gelk works on a new Shadow of Intent setup.
Then you jump on it and line yourself up where the railing meets the metal thing, and do the same thing, but without turning, and you get a good launch almost every time. It's pretty simple. You can probably get
Brianato develops a new sideways alternative for the Shadow of Intent DC launch, requiring a fairly specific angle. Kronos once again returns with the new sideways setup for what's typically a backwards DC launch.
I deploy my DC and keep the jump and just hold forwards, and that is just a simple sideways DC launch in the mode. So here, crouch, forwards, and it always works. Just hold crouch and forward.
Sasquatch finds a nice sideways DC launch for full game. Instead of opting for silo clips, he does this. High Nails finds that pause buffering increases consistency of DC launches by helping with the new precision required to hit the trick. The community has developed and progressed the DC launch for years. It continues to prove to be an outstanding and iconic trick. It appears that as of this week, a patch update in Halo 3 has returned DC launching how it was at release of MTC on console. And with that, thank you everyone for watching.